When is the last time you talked to a stranger?
Yeah, so the last time I talked to a stranger was yesterday. I try to do it every day because I actually find it tremendously reassuring in a fairly dark time.
Joe Cohen ziet het al jaren om zich heen. Mensen maken steeds minder contact met elkaar. Dus schreef hij een boek over onze relatie tot vreemden. En noemde het The Power of Strangers, de kracht van de vreemdeling.
No one was measuring how frequently people talk to strangers before, but you can line it up with some of the broader trends like the loneliness epidemic. People are feeling far more lonely, they're feeling far less connected to their communities. You can look at something like levels of social trust, which scientists measure, which basically means how much do you trust strangers. That has fallen off a cliff in the last 30 years. And so if you don't trust the people around you, then of course you're not going to talk to them because you don't think they're trustworthy, right? You could even look at some of the stranger danger propaganda that was huge in the US.
Do you know what to do when approached by strangers?
Bad strangers and good strangers look and act the same, so avoid all strangers.
Mostly, all strangers are dangerous.
That poisoned a lot of people's minds against the people around them. It made them very defensive about strangers. It gave them this idea that people they didn't know were dangerous, when we know from the data that that's just not the case. But all these things sort of conspired, I think, to take people out of circulation and kind of draw them away from each other.
Maar Cohen is niet de enige die het tij wil keren. Conversatie-expert Georgie Nightingale wil mensen helpen om over de grootste drempel heen te stappen: hun ongemak.
I try and make a practice of speaking to strangers every day. I usually have to leave my house every day, which means that I usually come into contact with people in some capacity. And I find it's a way to help me wake up, get off autopilot, to connect.
Omdat het praten met vreemden eerder wordt afgeraden dan omarmd, kunnen we er ook weinig van.
I am Finn, I'm 27, and I don't often talk to strangers. I want to change this because I think I could have a bit more of a rich life, being able to talk to strangers.
Nu het wantrouwen groeit, is het een vraag die een beroep doet op ieders verantwoordelijkheid. Hoe maak je contact met degene die naast je staat? Het is een vroege vrijdagochtend in Hartje Londen als 4 mensen binnenkomen in een zaaltje voor een uitdagende cursus. Laura en Finn zijn Britten, maar Carlo is hiervoor ingevlogen uit Italië en Mariu zelfs uit Estland. De cursus heet Transformational Conversations en Georgie startte deze in 2016 omdat ze zelf merkte hoe haar leven werd verrijkt door het contact met vreemden.
So we're doing a great job in the world removing friction, making things really optimal, but as part of that process, removing the friction that is the human connection, the small micro-interactions that we have.
It all started because I noticed that something was missing in my life. I felt unfulfilled in some way. And then I realized it was in part due to my conversations. They were just really boring and repetitive. Basically, people were saying, "What do you do?" Or "How's work?" And I felt like my entire identity had been narrowed down to this one thing. And I really wanted to escape that, have much richer, more meaningful conversations.
And that led to me designing the curriculum, which is this program to this today. Started with workshops. I also, as part of that, had to go and talk to strangers on the street, which was an amazing experience for myself because I also found it a little bit intimidating. But I realized, oh, this is actually learnable.
I talk to many people all the time as part of my job. But talking to a person on the street, well, that's scary, yes.
So I commute a lot. I spend a lot of time in public transportation for hours, days. So I'm always close to other people. And I must say that I never started any conversation.
A large part of my work is helping people feel like they can connect with anybody everywhere. So you can belong anywhere simply by being in interactions with people. And I think that's a really important part of being human.
You know, it's funny because I'm the son of a funeral director and I was a reporter for a long time. And I am not terribly naturally sunny on my perception of human nature, at least coming into this. I was fairly skeptical, occasionally cynical, pessimistic. And what this did, specifically putting myself out there to interact with as many people as possible, was that it gave me hope. Psychologists have discovered that there's actually a raft of benefits to interacting with strangers, even if it's in passing, even if it's just small talk. And those can include an enhanced sense of well-being. It can lower loneliness. It can lower prejudice. It can make people feel more connected to their communities. So to me, the most profound research that's been done on this, which frankly really turned my head and changed my perception of the people around me, was done by two psychologists named Nick Epley and Juliana Schroeder in Chicago. And what they did was they sent a few hundred people out to go talk to strangers on mass transit. Before they deployed these people to go do this, they interviewed them and they asked them to predict how it would go. And almost every single one of them predicted it was going to be a disaster. They were very uncomfortable with this. You do not talk to people on the subway. And then they went out and they found that every person they talked to was receptive. These conversations went on for an average of like 14 minutes. No one was rejected. The people they spoke to were much more interesting than they thought. And more importantly, the people they spoke to thought that they were interesting. Because one of the things that keeps people from talking to strangers is this fear that you don't have anything to bring to the table. And I've read the survey data on this, on some of these studies, and the tone of people's responses after the fact feels like a revelation. Like they honestly can't believe that it went this well.
Do different cultures treat the stranger differently?
So different cultures have different approaches to dealing with strangers. One of them is called smiling cultures. And what a smiling culture is, it's a culture in a place that has attracted a vast number of immigrants over hundreds of years. So when you have a place like Brazil, which over centuries has attracted immigration from all over the place, that's a smiling culture. That's a culture where people smile more, they laugh more, they gesture more, they're more openly, visibly friendly, and they're more attuned to like the emotions of other people. When you live in a place that's very diverse, you're forever faced with the difficulty of talking to someone who speaks a different language, who may have different social norms. You need to work a little bit harder to connect with those people, and the way you do that is by smiling and being overtly friendly. Brazilians are famously very friendly. Places that have smiling cultures are like this. And it's just a way to signal that you are not insane, you are not dangerous, you are trustworthy, you are cooperative, and even though we come from different cultures, we can actually talk to each other and we can work together.
I'd like to introduce at this point a principle that you're going to find very useful in this program and also in life. You don't have to wait for someone to invite you. You can choose to go first.
Often in conversation, they fall flat because you have two followers in a conversation. And much like if you imagine a dance, you had two followers, it wouldn't lead to a very good dance.
What do you do?
Well, I'm managing a company in the Netherlands, which is about helping people traveling by train in Europe.
Wow, okay.
Often in small talk, for instance, in new conversations, no one is taking charge. No one is actually creating enough of momentum in a conversation for it to move in a certain direction. And that's why things fall flat.
Usually, when I finish a conversation, I'm like, oh wait, no, come back. I wasn't, I didn't start yet. So, yeah.
So there's this very persistent misunderstanding about the nature of humans as a social species. And a lot of it stems from this belief that for 99% of our existence on Earth, we stayed with little bands of people, right? And they were stable and they were related and everyone was the same. And we've suddenly been thrust into modernity and we're terrified because there's all these different people around. That's not the case. There have been analysis of like genetic analyses that found that as far back as we know, people have been mixing. When you go back into the deep history of traditional societies, of hunter-gatherer social organizations, it wasn't like a hardcore group of people. It was what was known as a fusion-fission society. And a fusion-fission society is something where there's constant traffic between the groups. There was a benefit to interacting with other groups. And those benefits were you would increase the pool of mates. It would be you got news, you learned about innovations, you learned where water was, you learned where food was. So how does this work? How do people safely reconcile the opportunities of talking to strangers and meeting new people with the potential threats that including new people in your life might bring? And according to anthropologists, they did it through something called greeting rituals. A stranger would approach a band of people. he would stop about 100 yards or so away. He would throw his spear or whatever weapon he had off to the side, and he would sit until they came out. And what that did was it showed these people that he was not unhinged. He wasn't chaotic. He had a strong sense of self-control. Once he reassured them that he wasn't going to be a threat, someone from the group would come out, maybe an elder, and they would sit with him for a little while. And this was a very long, drawn-out, kind of stylized process that anthropologists have seen all over the world in these traditional societies. And in time, once the people are reassured about the intentions of this person, he would be brought into the group. And so this is basically how that fusion-fission society worked. There was a growing web of relationships even then.
Another tool is to break scripts. Scripts are the question-answer sequences we often have in conversation, like, how are you? Fine. What do you do? Your job title.
They are not very exciting, to be honest, right? You can improve them by making them more interesting.
So for instance, someone says to you, how are you? Instead of saying fine, you could say something different. You could say like a number out of 10. This is one of my favorite ones.
So people ask me how I am, and I say 7.5. 8 when I've had the coffee.
People often are a bit surprised to hear it, but they find it very playful, and they often respond with how they are out of 10 as well, or they ask me why. So it leads to a follow-up often.
Now my friend Marcus, who actually taught me many years ago, he went into Pour à Manger and he was like, hey, can I have the best Americano in the world? Now the barista turned to his colleagues and was like, hey guys, can we make the best Americano in the world here? And they were like, yeah. And then they make the coffee, and then he gets on the house. Which, by the way, is a byproduct of having meaningful conversations with people. You get free stuff all the time.
Free stuff.
But the reason why I'm like pointing this out as an example is think how many times this barista has been asked that question. And it's very nice when you had that spark of like somebody actually treats you as a human being. So this is what the invitation is can you make this moment that you're going to have already more meaningful? Okay, shall we give it a go?
What's your favorite food?
So I love Thai cuisine.
Okay. And no, wait, so I think now how do I break your response? Okay.
And when do you think of this? In the moment or beforehand?
Ideally, you think about it beforehand, because when you're in the moment, often our brains go blank because of the pressure, the perceived pressure.
Maybe I should ask, what's your least favorite food?
Ooh, yeah. Yeah, that might be interesting.
What's your horror? Yeah.
Okay, what's my least favorite food? Ooh.
So then around 12,000 years ago, we have the agricultural revolution. And what that allows is for people to finally settle down. So we're no longer nomadic people, we're no longer traveling, we're in one place. What that did was create the ethos of hospitality. And you can see how critical hospitality was to the flourishing of the human species by the fact that so many cultures considered it a sacred obligation. So in Arab cultures are perhaps most famous for hospitality, which makes sense because as humanity came out of Africa, they were passing through a lot of lands that became Arab lands later on. But lots of food, lots of hospitality. It was considered like a neo-religious way of acting. But it also turned up anywhere. Anywhere where there was people, you would see that these traditions took hold. And as these settlements spread out, it allowed for humans to sort of radiate out because they basically had these bus stops all over the place that they could stop off at. They functioned as hotels.
One of the tools actually I like the most when it comes to talking to strangers is using statements. People often think in conversations it's all about asking questions, and I love questions, but I think that questions often demand something from people that not everybody feels ready to give.
Strangers don't know who you are or why you're talking to them. Why would they answer your questions? They have to make an assessment. Who is this person? Do I want to start a conversation with them? Is this worth it? You can make statements about yourself, the other person, or the context you share. I'm actually quite hungry right now. You have a cool hat. My coffee is slightly zoning out. You have an interesting watch. You could be at a coffee machine and say, I am so ready for this coffee. You're building, 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 building together. You're not asking questions, you're statements.
So you can try this. You can, be in a space, whether that's the supermarket, or it's in the queue for somewhere, or it's on the train. Give it a bit of time, tune to the person, and then make a statement. Offer it out and see if they respond. So I always encourage people to start with that.
Say 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, we start forming cities. Settlements grow to the point where now they contain thousands of people, even 1 million people. So cities, even though they were dirty, even though they were messy, even though they were hotbeds of disease and over the thousands of years that followed were on fire half the time, always attracted a great number of people because they satisfied some sort of pent-up need that people had. It unlocked something in people, a potential that they might not have known they had. So self-expansion is this idea that you incorporate a little piece of everyone you meet, right? So every time you have a meaningful interaction with someone, anytime someone shows you a side of themselves that you didn't expect, you grow a little bit. You incorporate some of that. You become a little bit of that.
How are you feeling, Finn?
I'm a little bit nervous.
Great. Nervousness is always a great place, but I'd encourage you to reframe it as excitement. What we're going to do this afternoon is we're going to apply what we've learned in the classroom in the field, right? So where people are actually living in everyday life. Strangers.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Hello.
Hi.
Okay, you give us one.
Well, he's too busy making this cup of tea.
Okay, some here.
Hi. No, thank you.
Okay. So, be a bit louder.
Okay. Hi.
Afternoon. So, see if you can really feel into the depth so that it like comes out with joy. I want this person to have a freaking awesome day. Like, as if they were your best friend.
Okay.
And even if it sounds weird and whatever, just go through it.
I'm ready for some surprise looks, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Remember? We're trying to get the surprise, the energy, the excitement back.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. I'm going to do it as well, all right? Okay. Good afternoon. Hi.
Hello.
Okay, your turn.
Right. Can't clock anyone's eye this time.
Just use the voice. People will eventually look up.
Oh.
How was that for you?
Challenging, for sure. I was noticing a lot of tension in my body, but I think just as we started to walk down the market, really trying to give people some really just positive intentions with my mind and just giving them the best they possible helped. But I was also aware of how great you are at this. And maybe a bit of performance anxiety.
I see, okay.
Yeah.
Often there can be a story in our mind that, you know, people are going to think I'm weird or I'm not very good at this.
Yeah.
That's all pretty normal. I'm excited to see what the Finn flavour of ice cream in the conversation looks like.
Hey, me too.
So when I was a kid growing up in the 1980s, the age of stranger danger, John Walsh was the host of America's Most Wanted, and his son was actually murdered by a stranger. And so a lot of the stranger danger hysteria came from these isolated instances of a stranger abducting and killing a child. The coverage of that was so overblown that it sort of overheated people's perception of the actual threat, way out of proportion to what it really was. That was everywhere. That was on milk cartons. That was on kids' cartoons. It was all over the place. There was an endless parade of police officers brought into our classrooms to warn us that literally everyone we don't know poses some sort of mortal threat to us. There's no data to support the hysteria that we feel. The vast majority of major crimes, from rapes to murders, they're committed by people known to the victim. So according to the data, if we want to freak out about something, you should freak out more about your uncle, your neighbor, because those are the people who tend to do most of the killing in society and not some total stranger.
In Nederland was er in de jaren 80 en 90 een soortgelijke trend als stranger danger. En dat was de ophef over de kinderlokker.
En wel meteen doorlopen, hè? Niet met vreemde mannen meegaan en geen snoepjes van andere mensen aannemen.
Een van de jongens heeft ook gezegd dat ze, als er zo'n aanrander of zo'n man aankomt, dat ze dan hem vastbinden. En de ander heeft ook gezegd dat ze mee in de bosjes slepen. Nou, en dan uitkleden of zo en aan de piemel trekken. En of ze meenemen naar hun auto en dan wegrijden naar hun huis of zo.
When you have movies and TV shows like that, they're pushing a big red button that exists in everyone, right? We are naturally wary of strangers because we're naturally wary of the unknown. We've evolved to be that way. It's useful to be that way. But when you have that button and that button is being pushed over and over and over again, it really overinflates your sense of threat and warps your perception of the world and warps your perception of how dangerous the world actually is.
These people think I'm going to go be crazy. think I want to go again.
You looking for people?
Yeah, I suddenly feel exposed, but also finding it difficult to know who to talk to.
Okay, well, you don't need many, you need one.
You want more?
So what I encourage you to do to like relax is to spend some time in the space with somebody, doing your own thing, like looking at the food, so don't rush. Like, see who's around. There's a couple people here, there's that woman down the end.
Yeah. I've had some really good chicken from here, by the way. It's really tasty. Where are you guys from? From Denmark. Oh, very cool. Wait, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, it's so cheap.
It's an hour and it's £20. That's incredible. That's very cool. I've learned something. Thank you very much. £20 to Denmark?
What?
It's £20 to Denmark.
By which means?
Flight.
What?
The train to the airport is more expensive than the flight.
Fuck.
So she said.
She said.
I really appreciate the nudge you gave me earlier. I know I was coming back to you halfway through and just spend a couple of seconds with them and to allow them to make sure they didn't feel like I was going to be a threat. And then just saw their faces light up.
Usually at some point in the training, people will have a kind of epitome of like, wow, I can do this.
There's an organization called Braver Angels that was formed after the 2016 election in the United States. And it was formed by a Republican political operative, a Democrat political operative, and a family therapist in Minnesota. And the challenge that they set for themselves was they were going to try to get Republicans and Democrats to literally sit at a table and talk without screaming at each other or murdering each other.
Politics has always been a passionate subject, and we've always had deep political disagreements. That's the way it's supposed to be. But we've gotten to the point where people can't even talk to one another.
And they had to build this whole framework, this whole like therapeutic framework to make it happen. And the big insight from it, which is something you can apply to any area of your life, is that the way we usually have political discussions is backwards. We lead with conflict. We lead with the thing that's going to disqualify the other person in our eyes. If you do it the other way, which is what Braver Angels does, you sit people down, you tell them to say where they're from. They bond over the fact that they have dogs. People always find something in common. It happens naturally. If you facilitate a situation where those bonds will form, then you can have an actual political conversation. And so Braver Angels did that. It's about connecting people first and then having the actual difficult conversation. And I heard some of the greatest political arguments I've ever heard in my life at that thing because people were not just yelling slogans at each other, they were actually engaged.
Love to try some. That is tasty. Where do you get everything from?
From Spitalfield Market.
Spitalfield Markets. Do you guys have to take that yourself, or do you get delivery? You look happy. What's your secret? How are you so happy?
Because I've got free coffee from waitress.
It looks so tasty. Thank you. How do you cook your chicken? How long have you been doing this?
More than 2 years.
Are you just that charming? Is that how you get?
It's been different.
Yeah. What did you do before that?
Before that, nothing.
Nothing. It looks so fresh though. I love your shop. Where are you from?
Italy.
Italy. Oh, that's another reason to be amazing and happy. Yeah. Do you get to go on holiday much?
Sometimes, yeah.
You got to slightly undercook the pasta, right? Al dente. Yeah. I love Italy. I've actually just been to Italy. It's a magical place.
How was that?
Also really, really good.
The smile.
Also wasn't going to bite my head off.
Whoa, wow, these people, they're actually quite kind and friendly. Who would have thought? Really cool about what Finn's sharing is like, this is transformational, I think, for the way that people see the world. Like, no longer are these strangers. These are just people, going about their day, serving me in some way. They have histories, they have stories, there's things I actually can get interested by. The world feels more connected. There's more access to like the next person. You don't feel so lonely. I mean, these things are available on our doorstep.
So the forces are aligned against us, right? They're aligned against Georgie. They're aligned against me on this one. There are so many incentives to do the opposite, to be antisocial, to demonize other people. The media is run that way. Our politics is run that way. People aren't living in the same areas that people who are different than they are. I think we need to commit to being more curious about each other, and I think talking to strangers is a fantastic way to do it.